Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, occult researcher Michael Joseph returns to the show. In this show, Michael will take us through the elite's occult theology and how that theology is embedded in the 9/11 event from 16 years ago. Due to the complexity of the material presented, it is highly recommended to watch the slideshow as we make our way through the discussion in order to fully understand Michael's explanations and insights. Michael makes no claim that his research or interpretations on this topic are definitive or absolute. He is simply offering his insights based upon his extensive research. If you are listening to this show on Mixcloud, a link to Michael's slides can be found in the description box below. And so without further ado, here's the conversation with Michael Joseph. Michael, welcome back to the show. It's always a pleasure having you on because the information that you bring forth with regard to the occult is always extremely fascinating. It's really some very, very deep research. And tonight's show, we're going to dedicate to 9/11, which this September, it will be 16 years ago that the 9/11 event took place. And what you're going to take us through tonight and show us is that 9/11 was really all about the occult. Many people still buy into the official government story, and what we're going to do tonight through your work is to try to explain to those that maybe still believe that story, that maybe they need to take another look.
Before we get into this, I'll just say that, a lot of people have covered 9/11, what happened? Was it directed energy, nukes, no planes, whatever? All that stuff is going to be set aside for this, where this is just purely symbolic. And I think that that's something that's not really discussed a whole lot. So that's kind of the reason why ask you if you want to do a show on it. So, starting off with that, we'll go to the first slide here, and we have Mr. Baphomet, a figure that people are probably very well familiar with. And I was just going to go through some key points to remember. And if people have listened to our previous discussions, especially our first one, a lot of the same themes will be popping up with the sort of religious elements and the conflicts between the Orthodox and the esoteric versions of Christianity, things like that. So, Baphomet is essentially this hieroglyph for alchemy. It's not a god that people worship in a material sense. It's just a key that encodes information, essentially. And that's what all like the tarot cards are. It's essentially kind of like a tarot card. So the whole idea is turning crude matter or Saturnian lead or a profane doctrine, consciousness, person into the divine or Godhead. And this is by unifying the opposites, so merging male, female, good, evil, polarities into unities and putting them into one, and then you purge this dead weight or this Saturnian lead during some sort of ritual. And that's to be transmuted into spiritual gold. Now, spiritual gold can be relative to what somebody thinks that might be. And I think that's going to kind of apply to this, where, a lot of people might not agree with what the occultists that seem to be behind, the controlling force around us view as being good or gold. And we might view it very differently. So that's kind of a point I just want to stress at the beginning of this.
But you're coming at it from their perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I try to do. I try to take the literature and then look at how it manifests in the world, look at the symbolism we get, and then see if there are connections. And so that's basically what I'm trying to do, is just draw these connections that I think are pretty profound, or at least specific ones are very profound. And then there's a lot of other little ones that kind of support it.
So we're going to try to understand, Michael, the minds of the controllers, in other words. So I think what you're saying is, and tell me if I'm wrong, the listeners have to just set aside whatever thoughts that they have or understandings that they think they have about this, and just to sit back and listen to understand how their theology works and why they're doing what they're doing. And we're not saying what they're doing is good. What we're saying is to understand the method, the rhyme and reason behind why they do what they do. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. And not to really demonize occult knowledge. You can think what you want about it. but that it is definitely being utilized. And, you know, wherever you want to take that, it's all good. They're just using it wrong. It's all bad and evil, or it's some sort of mixture. That's up for anyone to decide on their own. So, a little review on the version of deity or the divine in the occultist, sort of viewpoint. It's essentially this androgynous perfect union that is devoid of sex. So it's a unification of them. There's no good and evil. It's just being. This is like an equilibrium of the duality or polarity of what our earthly realm is in. And this is what people like Madame Blavatsky in her book, she has like a little diagram talking about the layout of our reality, and Earth as we know it is what she calls unequilibrated. So we're in duality, and that's like the checkerboard on the Masonic floor, and you're trying to unify that into one, and that's, again, through this process of alchemy, which Baphomet is a hieroglyph for. So this essentially goes to the idea of the cycle of evolution, and we'll talk a little bit about this later in relation to cosmology a little bit, and the idea of the Big Bang and evolution and what we're taught about that. It's very in line with all this occult thinking that humanity and existence goes through this cycle of evolution and death and rebirth, and it's many different cycles of this, but it's all heading towards this perfect blend of spirit and matter, or heaven and earth. And that's what the adepts mindset is, to blend heaven and earth, essentially. That's like the great work. And so this spiritual essence of oneness in its perfect form is essentially what Blavatsky will call the pure spirit of Lucifer. And this isn't some personal being or some angel with wings flapping around, you know, in an anthropomorphic sense. The reason they use Lucifer is just because the Orthodox, in the King James Bible, I believe that's where they have Lucifer, the fall of Lucifer kind of came into play, and they use that word, which obviously means Lightbringer, and your guest Priscilla talked a lot about Lucifer in past shows. So it's kind of like, you know, laid out there that the mystery traditions think that the Orthodox is essentially like raping or bastardizing this pure spirit, which really stems from the Eastern religions and what the mystery religion is about. And Blavatsky says it all kind of stems back to the Vedas, Hindu philosophy, and their worldview. And that pure spiritual doctrine, that is where the mystery religions derive their understanding from. And that is what the true nature of good and evil is to them. It's aligned with that doctrine where it's just a polarity, it's an illusion, and you're trying to equilibrate back to this oneness. So that's kind of this idea of this pure virgin state and Lucifer kind of being synonymous with each other. And then the great work is just trying to bring that into fruition, like perfecting mankind in the image of deity. So if deity is an androgynous union, then if you're trying to bring that to earth in some way, this gets into the ideas of transhumanism and a lot of the transgender themes that we've been seeing going on a lot now. And we can get into that later too. But this is kind of the idea of rebuilding the temple of man. And I think that from my own assessment, Solomon's temple is like the old temple where it's the two pillars, Jachin and Boaz, separated. And then the model of Ezekiel's temple in a symbolic way. That's what Albert Pike talks about, is what they are aspiring towards, whatever that means in the Kabbalistic interpretation of the temple of Ezekiel and the book of Ezekiel. And so to sum all that up, the idea is equilibrating this dualistic realm and taking heaven and earth, which are separated, and putting them into one. And that is essentially the great work. And this Baphomet figure kind of encapsulates all that. So before we move on, just say one thing. You see the little serpents going around that staff? It's like the Hermes caduceus. That's essentially the whole point of it. You separate them, separate the material, and then you unify them, and then you separate them and you unify them all the way up to perfection. And that's what that staff of Hermes with the two serpents intertwining, separating, and then unifying pretty much represents. So.
Okay. So, and Michael, when I talk about bringing heaven and earth together into one, is that synonymous with when they talk about as above, so below? Yeah,
pretty much. And that's really what all of this is kind of based on, you'll see this motif over and over and over again once you kind of understand the basics of it. So I believe that this is the basics of it as best that I know, and all of my research has been done in my occult science series. So everything is sourced there, and it's a very long series, and I'm sure some of your viewers are familiar with it, but that's where I'm pretty much getting all of this from.
All right, great. No, this is a great setup slide.
Yeah, and then I figured it'd be best to just read a couple quotes from one from Aleister Crowley on magic and alchemy, and I think that this will really sort of set the tone for what I'm trying to convey here. And this is from Magic Without Tears, and these quotes can be taken from pages 80 and 84. And he says, "There is thus in this school no attempt to deny that nature is, as Zoroaster said, quote, a fatal and evil force." So Zoroastrianism is sort of in line with all of this mystery tradition stuff. And so if nature, as we know it, is a fatal and evil force, it's the earthly realm unequilibrated. So this is like Saturn in the profane understanding, where it's just self-devouring, and anything that's false or false gods or, atheistic society will just devour itself. So that's of like the lower nature, or of the square that we talked about in our last discussion. And then he says that nature is, so to speak, the first matter of the great work. So having this Saturnian lead is the first thing you need to utilize or focus on for this work, because he says that's what must be transmuted into gold. And the joy is a function of our own part in this alchemy. So apparently the occultist finds joy in doing this. That is basically the joy of our existence on this realm. If you're an adept, that's kind of what I'm getting from it. And so for this reason, he says, we find the boldest and most skillful adepts deliberately seeking out the most repugnant elements of nature, that their triumph may be the greater. And I think that that's pretty telling, because if we are viewed as the profane masses and they view us as something that we need to be worked on, and they say they deliberately seek out the most repugnant elements of that, that might have something to do with all of this crazy excess materialism that you see in Hollywood, and that our society has kind of been pushed into overdrive on in the last, 20 something years. The idea of American materialism and just this atheistic society, and somebody like Mark Devlin, doing a lot of work on the entertainment industry and how it's very materialistic, and then that in turn influences all of society. You can see a purpose to that based on this passage.
Yes. And Michael, when you refer to Saturnian lead, what are you meaning by that, so that the audience understands?
Yeah, it's basically just a conceptual idea of a consciousness that could be manifested, or that manifests in the material world. So basically, we talked about in the first discussion the devil card in tarot, and we talked about all the things that the occultist would put into that category. So the devil is everything that is false. So it's false gods, false idols, a false consciousness, a false understanding of reality, a false understanding of the nature of good and evil. So if you don't have the divine light of the mystery religion, if you're not illuminated to the mysteries, you're basically going to be practicing black magic. That's what they would view it as. If you don't understand their quote unquote truths, you are a black magician. That is what Crowley and people like that say is black magic. And so this is where you really need to define these terms, because people will just, black magic, that's just evil, right? And so you have to understand what they view as being evil. It's not necessarily evil in the sense that there is good and evil, but that is just going to produce resisting what they think is an eventuality of uniting with God down in the end of the road, and they're trying to maneuver us. So Saturnian lead can really just encompass anything that they find profane. And so when you see that symbolically, you can kind of now attach that to, okay, when you see the Islam black cube, that's Abrahamic religion, right? So that's profane. So you can see how you can just apply it to whatever. Black Friday, you go out and buy a bunch of shit, right, for materialistic purposes. You can see how it just is utilized all over the place. So that's kind of what it all encapsulates.
It's connected back to Saturn?
Yeah, because Saturn is the last planet before you enter into the outer planets, and the outer planets in astrology and I think general esoteric philosophy are seen as not having polarity. They're only divine. And if we have a negative reaction to their influences, it's because we are resisting the will of God or something like that. So Saturn is sort of like this threshold into the unified realm, so to speak. So Saturn really encompasses all of the influences before it. And so that's why it's so important. And that's why it's the first matter of the great work. You're trying to transmute this world into something more divine.
Because you'll hear a lot of researchers say that they worship Saturn. So that is sounding to me like a misnomer, that they do not worship Saturn, that Saturn is perceived as part of the process of being profane. Am I understanding that correctly?
Exactly. And that's one thing that I've always had a problem with when researching all that stuff. And eventually when I started reading the literature, I'm like, the joke's on us. They think we're the ones that worship Saturn, but in this lower nature where Saturn has a function to them, and the esoteric version of that has something to do with karma and equilibrium, but it's just part of the process. It's not this symbol of the highest God. So again, when people are worshiping Orthodox religion, the occultist views you as worshiping Saturn. It's only a lower sphere on the tree of life. It's not the highest God to them. So it's kind of like all the stuff that, you've covered in your shows on Gnosticism and Yal the Baoth or the Demiurge or Yahweh from the viewpoint of a Gnostic or an occultist.
Right.
Saturn has a function, but when it's utilized in an improper sense, that's when it's basically producing lead or dead weight.
Okay.
And so it's very, very important. That's why you see a lot of the symbolism. But anyways, to finish up Crowley's viewpoints on this, he says that the Rosicrucian viewpoint is that he occupies himself primarily with spiritual and physiological alchemy. So essentially uniting the spiritual to, the physical body or kind of the material world. And so he takes this first matter of the great work, which is a neutral or inert substance, which he says can connotate any substance. And again, he says he deliberately poisons it, so to speak, and bringing it to the stage of transmutation, generally called the black dragon. And this is like the negrito, which we'll read about, the blackening. And he proceeds to work upon this virulent poison until he obtains the perfection theoretically possible. So again, this idea of deliberately poisoning something that is in the material world that you want to bring to Godhead, that's part of this philosophy. So I wonder, again, with all of this stuff that society seems to be guided towards, with all this crazy materialism and basically this really atheistic society that is predominant, if that is actually intentional and they're in their mindset, that's their great joy, is trying to mess with us until they achieve whatever their version of perfection is. So I hope you can see how this philosophy could be taken in a very dangerous direction.
Yeah, so they poison the well first, and that's part of the process of transmuting and working to bring it to perfection. So this would explain a lot about what they're doing in general with just about everything. We could start with the environment for one, poison the environment, right?
Order out of chaos.
Yeah. This is okay. This is an eye opener for me. So, I mean, I think I kind of knew this, but to see the words, especially coming from Crowley, is very interesting.
Yeah, and then lastly, to finish it up, so everyone's kind of up to speed on alchemy, Carl Jung has a very extensive, he did a lot of writings on this stuff, and if anybody wants to read a book that's pretty good on it, it's Mysterium Conjunctionis. It's the Mysterious Union or Conjunction, the unifying the opposites, and that's volume 14 of his collective works. And he says on page 197, this is from verse 253, that the alchemists understood the return to chaos, and this chaos is sort of the idea of the chaos in Genesis, the primordial chaos of creation. That's kind of like what it sort of reverts back to, this chaotic process of birthing something new, as an essential part of the opus, and the opus is just the great work. And it was the stage of the negrito, or the blackness, and the mortificatio, these are all Latin words, the death or killing, which was then followed by the purgatorial fire and the albedo, which is the whiteness. So essentially having this blackness and killing this profane consciousness, your lower ego, all of these sorts of things, and then purging it in this fire in the alchemical process, and then bringing about the whiteness or the purity of it. And so this is kind of like the idea behind things like, baptism and things like that. So these are the symbolic things about it. And so this spirit of chaos, he says, is indispensable to the work. So you have to have this chaos in order to perform this great work or this alchemy. And it cannot be distinguished from the, quote, gift of the Holy Ghost any more than Satan of the Old Testament can be distinguished from Yahweh. So it transcends good and evil, essentially. There is no Satan, there is no Yahweh. And he says the unconscious is both good and evil, and yet neither, the matrix of all potentialities. So essentially this idea that it is good and evil, it's that's how we perceive it in this lower realm that's unequilibrated. Yet it is neither good or evil, because in the top of the chain, there is no good and evil. It's just this matrix of potentiality. So this infinite oneness kind of thing. So it sounds very abstract at times, but this is just the general philosophy. And what you do with this work is, again, you're trying to equilibrate these things. So there is no good and evil, essentially.
Yeah, it's very interesting. What was crossing my mind, and I'll make this quick because I know we have a lot of stuff to go through, is when I pull something off, let's pick an event like Charlottesville, which was a staged event, in my opinion. Myself and others who are doing the research and understand that it is a staged event because we can pick up on their calling cards. As an example, one of the big calling cards is their numbers. They like to use the numbers 3, 6, 7, 8, 11, 33, 66, 77, and so on. So my thought was, Michael, that so if I'm doing shows and I'm calling out what's going on with these events, like Charlottesville, I'll use that as an example, are we, in their minds, screwing up their alchemy?
I would say so, because it relies on these ideas of good and evil for the profane. So if we see a picture of evil terrorists attacking this, I haven't looked much into Charlottesville, but just take any of those events, like the bombing in Manchester or something.
Yeah.
And then that provides the evil, and then they unify it through a benefit concert, One Love Manchester or something like that. So they are creating the good and evil for us to view as an archetype. Evil terrorist attacks, innocent babies and throws them out of the windows, the incubator crap, And that was one of those stories they used in the 80s to invade, I think, Kuwait or something, or the 90s. I can't remember when, but
that was Iraq with the babies.
Yeah. So they create this evil, and then they create this good or this innocence, and then they're the ones controlling both of it. And so they're unifying them both however they see fit. So you can see how this plays out in all these different things. So if we're trying to show people that they're being duped, that's their little magic act, obviously, is going to be, you'll see the pattern, and you'll see it all over the place. So that's basically what you can utilize as your foundation when you analyze these events. What is being pitted as the good guy and the bad guy, things like that.
Okay, so it's interesting because we have this dichotomy, right?
Mm-hmm.
They think they're doing good. They're applying their magic and their alchemy. And we think we're doing good by exposing their little theatrics. So it becomes a very, very interesting confrontation in my mind. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is interesting, but I think what the point is that they don't view good and evil as actually existing, but they're showing it to us for this strange purpose. And I don't understand exactly what that is, but it's always utilized in this alchemical process. And so I think that all of these events, especially JFK and 9/11, which we'll get into here, they're like illumination rituals that teach the mystery religion, as strange as that sounds. And I think that embedding that into our subconscious is important, because I think somewhere down the road, they're starting to reveal a lot of these things to us. And that's why a lot of movies do reveal these things even more so, despite all of the other ones that have all this materialistic stuff. There's still a lot of the elements of initiation into the mysteries, and you'll see these themes all over the place. And I think they want to embed it in us, this idea of rising out of the ashes of destruction or something like that.
Yeah, the phoenix, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if we go to the JFK parallels of 9/11, there's some interesting themes here. And if you look at this picture, we have the World Trade Center design where they have like the three pillars going up in all these different sections. And then that reflects Dealey Plaza, where you see the Elm, Main, and Commerce all merge into one and then go up. And then Dealey Plaza reflects the Tree of Life. We talked about this in the first discussion, where if you see the plaque on the right, you can apply all of the Sephirot of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and you see it's the same design essentially. And I filled in the street squares on the Tree of Life. So you can see the same design built into the Twin Towers, and we'll get into how the Twin Towers themselves represent this Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So point being that you have to have these opposites in a ritual. So if you have a mass ritual and you have a whole layout in a material fashion that represents the Tree of Life or the Twin Pillars in some way, granted it's hidden to most of us, then that would probably increase the efficacy of the ritual if you're really bringing it to the below, if you can see what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So if anybody's looking at this and confused, just look at the red arrow. That's where JFK was assassinated on the motorcade path if you transpose the Tree of Life to any of these diagrams.
So you have three arrows. You have the arrow on the left.
All the red arrows, yeah. That points to the spot where the JFK was assassinated in that event, or that, So on the plaque, you'll see the red arrow pointing to where, the motorcade turned onto Elm. So you can that's just to transpose it so people can see it reflected in the Trade Center, the Tree of Life itself, and Dealey Plaza.
So, Michael, the arrows are pointing on a lower part of the Tree of Life. So what does that signify? So
that signifies the place where the motorcade, the assassination event took place when you transpose that onto the Tree of Life diagram. So this is the layout of Dealey Plaza. So you can see where it says Dealey Plaza, right where the arrow is pointing, that's where he was assassinated. You see what I'm saying? So let's look at some motifs of the Twin Towers and the Tree of Life and some esoteric concepts. So if we go to the sun picture between the two pillars, this is something that you'll see a lot of popular photos have the sun in between them. And this actually reflects the sun's placement on the Tree of Life. And what it really does is the two pillars are heaven and earth, the male and the female, and the light and the dark, right? So the dark is earth. That's the earthly realm. And so this is them separated symbolically. Heaven and earth are separated. But when the sun is in the middle, this is actually what unites them. And you can see in this tarot card for the Lover's card, this is the card that is actually given the zodiac sign of Gemini. So in the tarot trump decks cards, every card has either a zodiac sign or a planet assigned to it. So the Lovers has Gemini assigned to it. So the Gemini twins, right? So that represents the Twin Towers. And so it's the male and the female separated. But in the Lovers card, what's uniting them in this trinity, because the solar angel is looking down on them, and then the man's looking over at the woman, and the woman's looking back up at the angel. So that's like the Holy Trinity expressed right there, where heaven and earth are united through this androgynous angel, right? That would be like an allegory for the esoteric spirit of Lucifer. It's an androgynous solar essence that is uniting heaven and earth. And you can see that this is a moment of gnosis where man understands his true purpose, where he's supposed to be united with deity. So this is kind of like an illumination hieroglyph. And you can see the serpent on the tree, right? The serpent that gives gnosis to man of the true nature of good and evil, where the tree of knowledge and good and evil is good and evil separated, and the tree of life is them equilibrated into the one. So that's kind of the idea of that story. So again, this is sort of the Trinity motif, and the sun, or the solar force, in the esoteric philosophy, they call it the spiritual sun. Now this is where it can get confusing. The spiritual sun represents the androgynous God. It's not a male force per se, but when it's a profane sun, that's like the lower patriarchal male ego. That's like the demiurge gods, all of these patriarchy gods that are oppressive and bloodlusting and crazy. That's their viewpoint of it. So this is kind of like, again, the square version of the sun, the lower one, and then there's the compass version, which is the spiritual one, the androgynous one. So this Gemini Lovers card depicts the spiritual one, essentially. And so when you see the sun in the middle of the Twin Towers, that's an esoteric invocation of this, as we can look at in the next slide, where we have the sun sphere and the tree of life. You can see it unites everything, right? Everything goes through the sun. The sun unites heaven and earth, the east above and the west below. And the Masonic tracing board, the south pillar is on the right. That's of deity or male. And then the north pillar is on the left. So this sun is unifying pretty much everything. And this is why the sun is so important in all of this esoteric religion.
Very interesting.
So this is the idea of why Christ is considered to be a mediator in both the Orthodox and occult theology. Christ is the mediator to the Father, to mankind. And so if you apply the astrotheology concepts, however legitimate they may be or not, whatever you think about it, the point being is when you do that, you can see that reflected here where Christ is the Son, where he is the one that comes down to earth and is God in the flesh form. So this is all reflected through this tree of life that pretty much unites everything. All things are created through him, right?
So is Christ the Son?
Yeah, essentially, but it's the spiritual, unified, special Son, where he's liberating you from the lower, egoic, dualistic, profane Son. So that's like, again, the male Son without the feminine component. So the spiritual Son is androgynous. It's, that's representative of Lucifer, essentially. And then the male egoic Son, that would be all of the patriarchal gods that are crazy, as they would call them, right? The angry Zeus who's shooting lightning bolts at humanity, having sex with all these goddesses, or Yahweh who's just, judging Israel, blessing them, and then cursing them. That's the duality of it. So that's the lower nature. So it's kind of like your lower ego and your higher ego or your higher self in sort of more spiritual philosophies.
So the sun that's in our sky, how is that viewed on the tree of life?
It's viewed both, where the adepts can use either one, where the profane just view it as the lower nature. That's the point of the adepts. They use both the higher Masonic concepts of the compass, and they'll also put out symbolism that's of the lower nature. But the point being that they understand both of them, where the profane only understand one of them. And so this is why they're pushing all of this mystery religion doctrine into stuff so that it floods our subconscious, I think, so that they can kind of enact it through things when they see fit. That's kind of, I think, the understanding of it.
Okay, got it.
So again, the esoteric and exoteric, the adepts understand both, where the profane only understand the exoteric. That's kind of the point. So, yeah, and then you can just see that esoteric, exoteric expressed everywhere. And once you understand what is what, then you can see how it's applied. So in the next one, we can look at the Statue of Liberty in between the two towers. So this is like the moon aspect unifying them, where we had the sun before, and then we had the moon. And of course, in esoteric philosophy and our current, accepted cosmology, the moon reflects the sun. So it's the same light, but it's the passive expression. It's how it's reflected on Earth. So the moon is relative to Earth and mankind. So when you see a goddess symbolism, it's not necessarily a female in form or sex. That represents man in the earthly nature as an allegory. So this goddess could represent me and you. We're both men, but this is us in our earthly form. So this is where I think it could be confusing for some people. So when you see a divine, pure goddess, this is like mankind united with the pure spiritual doctrine or the pure illumination of the mystery traditions. And if you see like this harlot motif, that's like man united with the lower nature, everything of the square, everything of the devil card, the false gods or atheism, everything we discussed as being profane in previous discussions. So that's where you can differentiate those two archetypes. And so essentially we have this virgin moon goddess. And then if we put the Statue of Liberty between the pillars, well, that's just like the High Priestess card where you have this goddess who has the torch of illumination, right? So she's kind of like equilibrated with the mystery religion or the divine illumination. And that's similar to this High Priestess goddess who's in between the two pillars. So if you put that on the Tree of Life, as we'll do here in the next slide, you can see the moon sphere I have circled. It's in blue, says moon. And the number 9 is associated. That's the 9th circle or sphere. And the sun is the 6th. So when you have something like Cancer, the Cancer glyph is a 6 and a 9 unified on the side. So that's like the union of the sun and the moon. And the reason for that is when the sun goes into the sign of Cancer, the Cancer sign is ruled by the moon. So it's like uniting heaven and earth, sun and the moon. So you can see these motifs it permeates everything pretty much.
So you said that the sun is number 6. How do they get number 6?
It starts that the top sphere is number 1. And then the number 2 is the next one down to the right. And then it crosses over to 3. And so if somebody just Googles Tree of Life, they'll find it. But basically you start from the top, and then the last one, the west, the sphere of earth, is the 10th. So this is why the numbers 1 and 10 are kind of important, because when you cancel out the 0, it just reduces back to 1. So it's like heaven and earth are united through 1 and 10. So this is all the numerology behind it, but I don't want to get too much into that because it might confuse people. But point being is that the moon is in this motif here. You see how the moon is on the lower sphere, and you can see the Statue of Liberty is right about where that would be placed if you put that Tree of Life diagram on those 2 pillars, and you can see the 2 pillars that I have inserted into the Tree of Life. So you see what I'm saying, that the Statue of Liberty kind of correlates to the same placement. And in the previous one, the sun was a little bit higher up. And again, I don't know who took that sun picture, but it was probably just a, subconscious thing, because again, a lot of these things are built into our subconscious for whatever reason. And the last point I'll make is that there's 3 sections that were on the Twin Towers. And if they represent the right and left pillars, which have 3 Sephirot on each of them, then perhaps that's an allusion to that. I'm not sure, but I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the only reason why I brought up the number 6, and I was thinking about the number 9, and I know we're not going to get into this, but the reason why it piqued my interest was because they use the numbers 6 and 9 a lot in their numerology. I was just wondering if it had to do with 6 and 9 on the Tree of Life. And I'm going to assume that it does. And I know you don't want to get into it because we'll be here all night.
Oh, yeah. No, I can explain something really quick about it. Yeah, maybe that would be helpful. Yeah. So the idea of like 666, that's a solar number. Even Crowley says that 666 has to do with the sun, the holy guardian angel. So again, if we have a spiritual sun or a more divine one of the compass that's androgynous, and we have a lower demiurge false sun, then you can see how the 666 could kind of apply to both. It could be the beast of the lower nature, or it could be, if you have the true knowledge of it, it could be the higher. So I think that they use that in a both profane and divine sense in a lot of stuff. And it's hard for me to tell sometimes which is which, but when I read Crowley's writings, there's sort of like this beast illusion, and then there's sort of like this reverence illusion for it too. So I think that has something to do with what we just spoke about with the esoteric and the exoteric sun.
Yep.
And the idea of the moon is that's going to reflect whatever that sun's energy put into it. So if it's an exoteric, profane solar consciousness, the moon or the earth will produce profane results. Whereas if it's a spiritual consciousness that's sort of impregnating the moon, then it will produce a divine earth. So that's why you have the divine virgin goddess that reflects the mystery tradition uniting with mankind. And so that's why this Statue of Liberty is sort of seen as very, stoic and divine, where she has the torch of liberty, where she has the true knowledge of the mystery religion. That's essentially what that would be saying if you just apply the symbolism.
I'm going to have to go back and listen to Jimi Hendrix's song, If 6 Were 9.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the basic symbolism of the Twin Towers with these sun and moon motifs that you can see built in, but they're hidden, right? Whereas the world, or America at that time, saw them as separated. Oh, heaven and earth is separated. Oh, Orthodox religion is what I know, that kind of thing, right? And so if we move on, we're going to talk about this hidden middle pillar. And there are allusions to this built into the old World Trade Center design, which we'll get into in a second. But to establish the foundation for that, the word caryatid, by definition, is a stone carving of a draped female figure, and it's used as a pillar. So the three keys to this is it's a pillar, it represents a female or a goddess, and there's a veil or drape theme to it, right? And so if we have a female pillar that's draped, you can see that represented in the High Priestess card. So this is like a pillar in between the north and south pillars, if you can see what I'm saying, if you use the goddess as a pillar. And so she's got a draped theme to her, and it's a goddess theme. And that is where you put the middle pillar in Freemasonry. So if you look at the Masonic tracing board to the right of the High Priestess card, you see a pillar in the middle that says W on it, and that's the wisdom pillar. And this is why you'll hear wisdom associated with Sophia or the goddess a lot. Now, this is confusing to some people, but the S and the B just represent the words strength and beauty. But the strength pillar is the north pillar, and that's why I have the north circled in red. It says N, and then the south circled in white is S. So those are the two pillars on the side with the wisdom pillar in the middle, and you see the west is the direction where the Masonic checkerboard is. That is earth, where it is in duality or unequilibrated, right? And then the east is up towards the divine, where you see that eye with the spiritual sun, right? That spiritual sun in the middle looks like it's the middle of the male and the female. And so this is the entered apprentice board. So we discussed this a little bit in our first discussion, where this ladder is leading up to the sun, but it's on the left side. It's on the north side. It's on the darkness side. So to me, this reflects initiation into your earthly ego, and you're going through this veil to understand that there's a higher sun above this earthly ego or these orthodox religions. And this is why it's an entered apprentice tracing board. Now, I don't know if that's the explanation given to people, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
So what's the sun, Michael, above the middle pillar? What would that be?
That would be the spiritual androgynous one, the pure spirit of Lucifer, the compass, all of that esoteric sun symbolism. And then the initiate is being led up into the orthodox sun right now because it's on the left side. That's the pillar of darkness, or the earthly realm, the Saturnian realm of form and structure. And so again, this is why I think that this is an entered degree, where you have to move up this ladder, and here's one of your first stages to understand the nature of, the orthodox, and then you're going to move beyond that. And so you can see these motifs start to play out in all of these different, the same motifs play out in all these different ways of expressing them. So you see it in a tarot card, you see it on the Tree of Life, you see it on the Twin Towers, you see it on a Masonic tracing board. It's all the same core themes, but if you don't understand the core themes, then it will be kind of confusing. And so once you get the core themes, it's like, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So it's actually pretty simple, but I think that's the veil that they try to hide it. They try to hide the simplicity of it. So this is why the goddess here on the High Priestess, she's looking very virgin, right? She's united with the mystery tradition doctrine and the true light. So this is her unveiled. This is Isis unveiled. This is somebody who's been initiated into the mysteries, versus the veil that would go over her is for the profane. So the veil essentially is the Orthodox religion. You can't see beyond that. That's kind of the general ideology behind this.
Now, the south pillar, Michael, on the Masonic image, there's a moon and the stars. What does that symbolize? This
is just reversing it to me. You have the male on the left with the sun, and then the female on the right. So this is like you're entering, and you have to reverse your conceptions of things.
Okay.
So don't get too caught up on that part of it. It's just a reversal. So again, this is what Albert Pike talks about, that the mystery tradition is a complete reversal of the Orthodox doctrines. And this is why you have the Hanged Man card, the sacrifice of the solar savior in reverse. That's kind of like reversing this ideology. That's what he talks about. And so essentially, if we move over to the Tree of Life, you can see that reflected. I put a middle pillar behind it. It's kind of in the background. that reflects where that W wisdom pillar would be placed if you put the tree of life Sephiroth on it. So essentially, the middle pillar is uniting heaven and earth secretly or hidden. And the two pillars on the left and right, for the profane, they think that heaven and earth are separated. And so you're equilibrating heaven and earth because the south represents heaven and the north represents earth, the light and the dark. And you're bringing them into one, just like we talked about with all the Baphomet and great work stuff in the beginning of the talk.
Okay.
And so how we can apply this to 9/11 with the caryatid, well, they had something called the Great Spherical Caryatid that was right in the middle of the Twin Towers. So here's a picture of it. And it has a black and gold motif, which we'll get into later. I mean, it's bronze, but you can see it's sort of, it's still got that lustrous gold kind of shimmer to it. But, so just by namesake, they're putting a middle pillar in there. And if that middle pillar is hidden to the masses or the profane, then of course they're going to hide it by throwing in just in the name, right? And so what happened on 9/11 is that this sphere was cracked and they lit an eternal flame for it. So just like the JFK assassination, that and 9/11 are like the two biggest events in American history. They lit an eternal flame for both of them. So that's pretty interesting. And so you can see how this idea of this sphere cracking, this has some sort of similarities to what we talked about before with the Big Bang, where the idea that there was this cosmic egg and this primordial material, and that was bursted at the point of creation into all that exists. And so to me, there's something interesting about this idea of cracking this sphere or this egg, where this ritual seems to me that they could look at it as something being like, we are cracking into a whole new consciousness. We are bursting heaven and earth together here. This event, in a microcosmic sense, is also a macrocosmic sense. So it's almost like it's this symbolic statement to the universe in a way that something very profound is happening here.
Now, in our last show, Michael, we talked about their theology, which says that spheres, circles, and curved lines are considered to be divine. So does that come into play here because this is round?
Yeah, and I think what it essentially represents to me is that this middle pillar that's been hidden, it sort of might be time to reveal that, or now it's time to unite heaven and earth and make it known to the masses. And this is stuff that we can get into later because we're going to see a lot of parallels to this.
Okay.
And just to relate it to the JFK, we have this goddess, right, Jackie Kennedy, in between the two pillars of the Gemini children. They're dressed in the same outfits. Now here they're reversed. You can see the males on the left and the females on the right. But, again, this is sort of the mystery religion. They do these polarity switches, but she's lighting this flame. And this has to do with the Vestal virgins. Vesta is the goddess of the eternal flame, the fire, right? The virgin goddess that holds the pure mystery tradition or the doctrines of it. So when you see a motif like this is them sort of initiating you into the mysteries, whether you're conscious of it or not. And you can see on this Vestal Virgin artwork, you have the checkerboard floor, and you have these virgins, and they're trying to unite this flame in the cauldron. And the cauldron has this serpent on it. And there's a lot of esoteric motifs built into this. I'm not going to go into them all, but the point being is, what a coincidence that the two biggest events in American history, they light an eternal flame, which is essentially the flame of Prometheus. It's the divine nature, the true nature of the compass in Freemasonry. That's pretty much what it all represents.
And Prometheus is Lucifer.
Yeah. But Prometheus is this Lucifer essence or consciousness trapped in a mortal body. So that's like a different phase of it, where this is how the adepts view themselves. They're trapped in an earthly body, but they have the divine consciousness of the cosmos or the true nature of our reality. And they're only confined to what they can do in the physical world, but they use that intellect to basically do the great work, right? And this is where science comes in, and the ideas behind CERN and transhumanism, where all of this Promethean stuff is giving technology to man. And that is kind of the essence of a lot of these things. And we'll get into some ideas of like the black cube and then the illuminated cube, like the Mac cube with the apple, right? The gnosis at the middle of it that you'll see in New York City. But so all of this stuff is essentially revealing the mysteries, whether you're conscious of it or not. And we can get into the idea of Isis mourning or the goddess mourning. I have a couple interesting quotes from Crowley here. And he states on Magic Without Tears, page 77, that he's talking about the Egyptian tradition of Osiris. He says that the central idea of the white school, again, this is white magic, is that everything is sorrow for the profane, but the initiate has the means of transforming it into everything is joy. So all the profane people who don't understand the true nature of reality or the mystery religion, we're in sorrow. And the initiates, like we read earlier on, their joy is transmuting us profane people into Godhead, the mysteries, whatever, moving us up the ladder of Freemasonry. And again, this is kind of seen like they're doing us a service. We're profane. We just are going to be self-devouring. They're going to help us out. That's kind of the viewpoint, as strange as it sounds. And so another quote from Crowley in Magic and Theory and Practice, page 15, he says, "To one who understands this chain of the aeons from the point of view alike of the sorrowing Isis and the triumphant Osiris, not forgetting their link in the destroyer Apophis, there remains no secret veiled in nature." So essentially, this is like Isis, Osiris, and then Apophis is Set, who murders Osiris. So to me, this is reflective of the JFK ritual, where Jackie Kennedy is Isis, JFK is Osiris, and Lee Harvey Oswald is Set or Apophis. And it's not that Lee Harvey Oswald is evil and JFK is good. They're just separated. The mystery traditions believe that they come from the same place, but we see the dualistic function of that play out in the material realm. So when the profane people mourn for the loss of their triumphant king or the loss of the Twin Towers being separated, we're essentially sorrowing because we're profane, where the adept would view it as a great joyful act. And he says that if you understand this motif, there's no secret veiled in nature. So you can understand everything about our reality by this mythology, according to Crowley. And so you see it played out in the JFK assassination and 9/11, where we have the Isis mourning motif, Jackie Kennedy, the veiled goddess, right? She's veiled. This is for the profane. And we have the Gemini twins in the exact same outfit. This time the female's on the left. And so there's that motif. And then on the left side, you've seen a lot of depictions of like the Statue of Liberty crying. So that's like the goddess mourning over, this tragic event. So we have a tragic event of JFK, a tragic event of 9/11, and we both have these goddess mourning motifs. But Crowley says here that sorrow or sorrowing Isis, that's for the profane. So I hope you can understand what I'm trying to convey here.
I mentioned in the discussion we had 2 days ago in preparation for this show, Michael, that Manly P. Hall had said in his book, Secret Teachings of All Ages, that they have taken the mystery religions and they have converted it into sorcery. And I never forgot that statement in the book. So as I'm looking at this, and I won't take too long here because I know we have a lot more slides to go through, it just seems to me like they are taking a very, very difficult, challenging, evil path in order to get people to a happy place. It just seems to me that, and maybe I'm just too profane, and that's what they're going to say. He's
join the club, right?
That wouldn't it be just a whole lot easier if they applied their technologies and their knowledge and they just put it out there and they started a process of educating and bringing the proper knowledge and wisdom to humanity versus going through all these shenanigans. Because at the end of the day, they can go through all this and they're going to say, well, we're going to take you from being profane to illuminated. But the truth of the matter is, people have no idea that that's happening. They have no idea that that is some path that these guys are trying to walk them down. So you're no smarter for it. So it leaves me a little perplexed to think about how they actually think this is going to work. I don't know. Anyway, that's my editorial. I won't go on and on about it.
Well, really what it is to me is the ultimate hypocrisy, where if you want to be in control and you want to give people like Stockholm syndrome. You know, you want to prop yourself up to be the bad guy, and it's got to be secret because the profane are so stupid. Well, maybe that's just an excuse for you wanting to manipulate people. And so that's the way I look at it, where it's like, of course it's got to be hidden, because if anybody knew what this was going on, they'd be like, fuck no. Or at least I feel like anybody in their right mind.
Right.
And this is not how you build people. Like, this is not necessary to me. Or you like it, and it just gets into this whole can of worms about what you believe to be right or wrong, whereas they have a certain set of ideals that they think is truth and is this mystery knowledge that has been going on forever, and they feel like they've been guiding humanity behind the scenes. And to me, this gets into the topic that there's definitely something spiritual going on to this, that I don't believe that human beings can just sustain this stuff over thousands of years. I believe that there's definitely some sort of metaphysical component and consciousness that is really doing this, and perhaps they are the ones who are indwelling in a lot of these upper echelon people. And maybe that's by design. Maybe that there's a purpose for that. Maybe they're allowed to do that for something. And that is something we can sort of elaborate on maybe a little bit towards the end of the discussion. Okay. But yeah, I agree. So now we have the wisdom goddess back to being unveiled here. So we saw the Isis mourning. Now we have the Isis uniting with the mystery tradition here in this slide. And so I just want to point out just how exact some of this stuff is. So we've looked at all of these things already, and now we're going to apply it to this picture of the Twin Towers, this aerial view. And if you look on the picture of the Twin Towers, I have a yellow arrow that goes down, and that's pointing at where that great spherical caryatid was placed. Now, if you'll notice, the north pillar or tower, that's the one with like the rod or the little double antenna on top. That's the north, right? And so if you look on the Masonic tracing board to the left of that, you see that wisdom pillar. It's formed in a triangle to the front two pillars, right? So you can see how their spherical caryatid, which would represent that wisdom pillar, is in a triangular form in relation to the Twin Towers from that viewpoint. So I hope you can see how they design these things very specifically to reflect what you see on the Masonic tracing board here and the High Priestess card. When you see the Statue of Liberty from the river, it does the same thing on the other side of it. So it's very interesting.
It's mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling. Going back to the picture with, Jackie Kennedy, everything is so scripted. Everything. This is how it's coming across to me, and, I knew that it's very pervasive. I knew that. But, as we're going through this, it should be coming very, very clear to anybody who's watching and listening that these people are in control. They are in control, because everything has their stamp on it.
Yeah, and, that leads to the questions, how much do some of these people know? Like Jackie Kennedy, is she just being told what to wear and what to do? It's sort of like an actor on a set. Right. You just get paid and then you leave and you just do what the director tells you. That's where it gets weird, because you have to wonder what is really going on with some of this stuff. And I've even had to sort of question, I don't want to get too much off on this tangent, but what really happened with Dealey Plaza, was that all just an act? Sometimes I wonder, like, what we saw with all of that, was that just a theater production? Was there a real event and then they molded it with the Zapruder film? Like, I don't really know. But the other thing is, Crowley talks about how in magic, the most powerful form of magic is recreating a myth. So basically putting yourself in a role of a god or goddess. So if you put yourself in a role of Osiris, Isis, and Set, like the JFK assassination, Crowley says basically the method of the dramatic is the most powerful form of magic. And he says you could start a whole new religion with that. I think that's his quote. He's kind of being joking about it. It's the most effective for starting a religion. I think that's what he said. And so when you see that playing out, you're wondering, like, are they trying to put people in these positions? Do these people willingly act something? And this will get into ideas behind like Donald Trump, where later on we can relate him actually to the figure of the demiurge or Yahweh or whatever. And the question is that somebody playing a role? Is that just how they are and they put somebody in that power and they don't really know what's going on? Or are they just playing an act and they're just playing their role and they understand all of this stuff and they're just doing their job and they actually are just in league with everything else that's going on? And we don't have to speculate on that, but these are the questions that kind of come up, I think, when you look at a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were just talking about. There is a presence that's omnipresent. It's directing everything. So regardless of the degree to which somebody understands what's going on, there is a higher degree of people.
Or just influence.
Or influence, right. That is, it's moving the pieces on the chessboard, and it knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and where to do it. And this is something that, it really is. It starts to like jam your frequencies a little bit, because this has been going on for God knows how long, which means that the level of dedication to ensuring that all of this stuff takes place on certain dates, times, players, and so on is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, and that gets into this next slide where we talk about, I'm just going to go over a little bit of the astrology. People don't have to know much about it just to convey these points, but if we look here, we're going to apply this goddess symbolism. And the Statue of Liberty is actually built into a key that's silver, and it has an 11-pointed star at its base. And what's very interesting is the tarot card for the zodiac sign of Libra, which is liberty, equality, equilibrium, right? The Statue of Liberty, and it's the justice goddess. And it's card number 11, and we have an 11-pointed star. Not to mention the Twin Towers is just a giant 11. And so what's interesting is that the Statue of Liberty is always present in all these events surrounding the Twin Tower or the new Freedom Tower. It's this symbolic thing that's just across the river. And so we have a silver key here. Now, Albert Pike talks about how there are silver and golden gates, which are the gates to heaven and earth. So the silver gate is the summer solstice, and the golden gate is the winter solstice. Now, with the precession of the equinoxes, they have changed zodiac signs. So before, the winter solstice was Capricorn, and then Cancer was the summer. So now he says they're in Gemini and Sagittarius, approaching Taurus and Scorpio. So essentially what that means is if there's astrological stuff going on in these constellations, that would be like utilizing the gates of heaven and earth. And so if we have a silver gate, then Gemini, well, Gemini is the Twin Towers, right? The twins. So if there's anything going on there, and what's interesting is we had Saturn in Gemini. So Saturn is like, in the lower profane sense, is like the lead, the blackening, the black cube, but also its structure and form. So if we have structure and form in the sign of the twins, well, that's the structure and form of the Twin Towers, right? So that's like the silver gate of Earth. And on the opposite side, in Sagittarius, we had Pluto, which Pluto is really essentially seen as the highest sphere on the tree of life in a lot of Kabbalah systems. So it's like this divine flame. It's like the torch of Prometheus. It's this all-consuming fire that breaks down form. It's the purifying fire that we talked about with Carl Jung in alchemy. That's the best archetype for it. So this is opposite Saturn in Sagittarius, the gate of the gods. And in Sagittarius is a fire sign. And it's the only projectile sign, right? And we had projectiles flying into the Twin Towers. Whatever you think about the legitimacy of planes or not, that's the story. And there was obviously a divine fire that dissolved the Twin Towers, because if it was just burning jet fuel that, poofed it all away, then you can see the astrology and the archetypes even reflected in the official story here. And so if this is an event that unites heaven and earth in an astrological sense, that's pretty interesting. And the last point I'll make is that in alchemy, there's elements assigned to planets. So silver is assigned to the moon. Therefore, the silver gate, the earth, the moon, that's why that's all there. Mercury is quicksilver, so it has this silver theme to it. And Mercury in alchemy is just something that connects. Like the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. Mercury is the god of trade, communications, things like that. Anything that goes laterally, right, across the world or something. And so Mercury, it was in the sign of Libra. So Libra, the goddess, And these were all connecting each other. And I'll just show a quick little thing. You can just show this. You don't have to know a lot about astrology. All you have to know is that Mercury was on the eastern horizon the minute the first plane hit. And what that means is that there's a very short window for Mercury to be right at the horizon. A half hour later, it wouldn't have been there, or it would have been further away. So this was triggered by that moment, which was very precise, where Mercury was exactly in line. So the eastern horizon, that's the divine, right? The east is the top of the sphere tree of life, but the horizon divides heaven and earth, right? So Mercury binds or connects. So Mercury here in this triangle is connecting Saturn in the Gemini or the earthly realm, and then Pluto, the fire, in the heavenly realm, and it's connecting it at the horizon. So again, you're unifying or equilibrating heaven and earth in the astrology and in the event. And so you can see that Libra, you have the Statue of Liberty goddess, Saturn, you have the lead, the twin tower structure, and then Pluto is essentially the function of the Hindu god Shiva, according to Blavatsky. I don't need to get into it too much, but basically it just breaks down Saturnian structure, old dead forms that have outlived their usefulness, and rebirths it into a new form. So after this, they rebirthed it into the Freedom Tower, right?
When you say rebirthing it, they equilibrated it. In other words, they brought it into one.
Yeah, that's the point of the alchemical process. The solvent coagula on Baphomet's arms, you separate and then you unify, you dissolve the body or the material or the lead or the profane, and then you coagulate or birth it into a new form. So there's like sort of this watery effect of birthing, and then that creates a new life, right?
So the new form is the Freedom Tower.
Yeah, because they equilibrated the two towers into one, right? A one World Trade Center. And so to get back to this idea of the zodiac being utilized, there's very interesting events that go around the Statue of Liberty in relation to Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. And this area of the zodiac really reflects the mystery religion, where Virgo, if we look at the picture of Mary crushing the serpent on the right, everyone's seen this. Anybody who grew up Catholic knows this. And so we have this virgin goddess, right? This is like the high priestess that we've been talking about. And then she's crushing this serpent. Now, the serpent is one of those things that is just like the sun. It has an exoteric and an esoteric function. So the exoteric or lower serpent, that would be the demiurge. That would be everything that we've talked about that's profane. And what's interesting is Scorpio is the sign of sexual reproduction. So male and female separated. I'm a male. I have to have sex with a woman to reproduce. That is actually seen as profane in the occult worldview because that's male and female separated. And so this is Mary, the virgin, which again is not a woman. It's the unification of the opposites into one, crushing sexual generation. And this is why when Orthodox religion, they talk about male and woman, obviously they have a problem with, LGBT and stuff like that. That's not a secret. So that doctrine to them, this is like crushing that doctrine. And so this is crushing all of the personal phallic gods, Yahweh, Jehovah, and their dualistic nature, the greedy, lustful gods, materialistic atheism that is produced. Basically, the idea is that when you have a false religion, that's what births atheism, because atheists will be like, well, Orthodox religion is dumb, so I'm going to become an atheist. So the occultists view atheism as a product of Orthodox religion. And so all of these things are of this lower nature of that lower serpent in Scorpio. And so Virgo, the virgin, the mystery tradition, the true light of Lucifer is crushing that serpent. And Libra is what is equilibrating them. So that's why Virgo goes to Libra, goes to Scorpio. And Virgo and Scorpio are like the opposites. And Libra, again, is this equilibrator essence to it. So again, the same motif. It's just played out all over the place. And the last point I'll make before I'll let you get a word in here is that all of the events that took place around the Statue of Liberty that were important, the construction began in the sign of Virgo. It went through the sign of Libra. That was like the start of it. It was open in the sign of Scorpio. They had a U.S. monument designation in the sign of Libra. It was added to the U.S. National Register in Libra. Richard Nixon had this big visit to it in Libra. And it was designated a landmark in Virgo, designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in Scorpio. And lastly, the September 11th event took place in the sign of Virgo. So all of these major events took place with these constellations that basically reflect this whole goddess equilibrium theme.
So I'll go back to my point before. So on Michael's chart here, folks, he's showing us key dates that have to do with the Statue of Liberty. So the first date starts in 1875, and then he ends it with September 11, 2001. That's 136 years of somebody paying very close attention to when things had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to keep in mind here, is that there's nobody sleeping at the switch when it comes to them putting their theology, their mystery religions, whatever you want to call it, into play. There's always somebody working very diligently over many, many generations to make sure that things happen when they're supposed to happen. Now, the other point I wanted to make, Michael, is that, and this caught my eye. So on the right, you have the Virgin Mary, and she's stepping on the serpent.
Mm-hmm.
And she is supposed to represent the pure spirit of Lucifer at the upper part of the image, folks, where Michael has the blue band. So it's very interesting because in the Abrahamic religions, and I'll speak to Christianity because I was a former Roman Catholic, the serpent is equated with Satan and Lucifer. And this picture that you have contradicts that completely.
Sort of. The mystery religion viewpoint is that Satan is no different from Yahweh. They're just on a polarity. This world is split, and that is an allegory of a story for the nature of our world. And the mystery tradition teaches that you can equilibrate back to this pure spirit that is androgynous, and that is the destiny of man. That is the true doctrine of any sort of spiritual system. They believe that's the truth. And so Lucifer, again, is just an allegory for Eastern religion, or at least Eastern religion from the viewpoint of Blavatsky. I haven't read a lot of actual Vedic texts, so I don't know how much Blavatsky's saying that this is what this means in Hinduism. Maybe other people who follow Hinduism don't believe that, but that's the mystery tradition's understanding of it. So it's all allegorical as a mode of consciousness or awareness of us in the material realm. And this upper consciousness, this pure consciousness, is in the spirit realm, and they're trying to bring that to the below. And so what you're saying with like the Roman Catholicism, to me, it's just an esoteric exoteric. When you see Mary being revered or worshipped, that's purely the mystery religion, because in Orthodox religion, they view that as blasphemous. They say you're not supposed to revere Mary in some deified way. Only Christ is God incarnate on earth, and then the Father or Yahweh is God. They're one. And then the Holy Spirit is just what conveys to man, something like that. So worshiping any saints, any Mary, any of that stuff, that's all paganism to them, or Freemasonic doctrine. That's all evil to them. Now, again, paganism, there's an esoteric, exoteric. We talked about that in the first discussion, so I don't need to get back into that. But like you said, it's just understanding what they view as the nature of Satan or Yahweh or good and evil, whereas the profane will say Satan is just some evil thing that's separate from God, even though God can use it for a higher purpose, where the occultists say, no, they're exactly the same thing. Satan in its orthodox form is just an invention of us being in a lower realm, and that's just our current state of consciousness, but we're evolving out of that consciousness, and that's the destiny of man. And I think that 9/11 was this symbolic act of like, they're dropping the hammer, they're putting the pedal to the metal, and they're going to start revealing all this shit to the world, and fuck anybody's reaction to it. I think that's kind of the essence of it.
Yeah, apparently that seems to be the model going forward.
Yeah, and like you mentioned in our last discussion, it's amazing what's happened since this event happened.
Oh yeah, yeah. I even mentioned to Oli that in 16 years since 2001, 9/11, 2001, they made more progress in those 16 years than they have in hundreds of years, because they have the pedal to the metal, and they're not giving a flying crap anymore about being discreet or, trying to walk around things, tiptoe around things. They're just going full steam ahead, balls to the wall, and putting their agenda in place. It's really incredible. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I'm at a loss for words a little bit, folks, because, when it starts to soak in and sink in, what Michael's taken us through, and you really start to understand how all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, because these people are in control. It really is something that, is mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I'll show one more example of how this motif is used, but it's been tweaked with the Occupy Wall Street. I have the little poster here. We have this ballerina, this goddess on a bull that's conquering it, right? And so essentially the bull just represents everything that's in Scorpio right there, because Taurus is the opposite on the zodiac from Scorpio, and everything that has a polarity on the zodiac has some sort of theme that goes along with it. So the bull, in a male phallic sense, or in the serpent phallic sense, represents, all these false gods, these demiurge, egoic, oppressive gods, patriarchal gods. And again, their understanding of it. And so this is fertility symbolism of the Western world, right? The Wall Street bull, that represents the Western imperialism to most people. And so if we have this goddess conquering that in the midst of all of this chaos, because they have all these like zombie type people marching around in the mist in the background. What's very interesting is they utilize this astrologically during this time period, because the Occupy movement started when the sun was in Virgo, right? So this virgin goddess, this Virgin Mary crushing the serpent, or in this case, the bull. And then it basically the first 3 months of it were the most important time. And that was when the sun went through Virgo, Libra, and Scorpio. And the mirror of this, which I think is very ironic, is that this is when Gaddafi was getting taken out in Libya. And dictator is basically an archetype of the phallic gods, Yahweh, the oppressive deity, right? The male patriarchal force, the dictator, right?
Yep.
And so they use this motif, and they have all this stuff in our consciousness. So they make Gaddafi look like the most evil man alive. Whereas I think David Weiss has a great video on Gaddafi's, it's like a 3-hour video on the other side of the Gaddafi story.
Yes. Yep.
And so what we're told is that he was giving his troops, his male, force, Scorpio troops, Viagra, which gives them, a phallic erection, right? Phallic things. And that they were going to go rape women and children, right? These virgin, innocent things like this goddess here. So you can see them utilizing the same astrological influence, but this is a different way, and they're molding it to their will, where they have one group saying, Occupy Wall Street, Western imperialism is bad, the United States is just going into all of these other nations and destroying them. That's evil. So we're going to protest that now. But on the polarity side of that, the United States is doing that, and nobody's saying a damn thing about it, and they're taking out Gaddafi, who essentially was going to unite all of Africa, and the UN sanctioned him, and NATO and the EU, all of that combined to take out Libya. And think about Libya, right? Like Libra, liberty. They're using that Libra constellation motif. And then he was taken out. And so, again, I stress that this was the continent of Africa, right? So the African-American race and its origins was being screwed over during this time. Now, fast forward 4 or 5 years later with the Brexit stuff, you have these same people who were protesting Occupy Wall Street saying that everyone is racist who's questioning immigration and all of this Black Lives Matter stuff. We care so much about the African race. Well, where were their bleeding hearts when the African continent was getting screwed over by the United Nations, who is enforcing the immigration, and everyone's cheering the EU and the UN now for the immigration stuff? Whereas they just slipped a blind eye when those are the organizations that screwed over an African continent. So you can see all the hypocrisy and all the manipulation, and it's using all of this astrological energy in combination with symbolism. And it's really crazy once you just understand the basic symbolism and how it applies to astrological correlations, how it manifests. And I have a couple videos in my Occult Science series if anybody wants to expand upon this with the whole idea of ISIS and the terrorist. The videos 27.3 and 27.4 explain a lot of this if people wanted to go check out more on all this. So just a side tangent I wanted to throw in there.
Now, Michael, another thought came to me as you're talking and taking us through this. You talk about Gaddafi, and there was a lot of good stuff that Muammar Gaddafi was doing for the Libyan people. And what I'll do is I'll add David's video to the description box so folks can watch it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Now, do they go in and destroy people or nations that are doing the right thing or trying to do the right thing because in their minds, then what's going to happen is we're going to have a happy, profane bunch of people. In other words, no war, everybody was employed, and generally speaking, the country is loaded up with a bunch of happy campers, and everybody's leading a very good life, or at least as good a life as they possibly can. Do they look at that and frown upon that and say, you know what, we can't have that. We can't have that because if you're happy in a profane world, then you're not going to ascend. You're not going to illuminate. You're not going to enlighten, and you're just going to screw it all up. So we're going to go in and we're going to bring the chaos. We're going to break it all down, and then we're going to build it back up, but we're going to build it back up our way.
Exactly. No, exactly. You hit the hammer on the nail there where this is my assessment of it. And again, I don't know on the world stage what's really going on. I don't know if people like Putin or Gaddafi were playing roles or really in on it, or if they were innocent. I don't know about any of that. But just based on what we see, it seems to me that when anything tries to be nationalistic, and again, that's separateness, right? And that's what they say the demiurge is. It's separate. It's separating doctrine, where their God is one, right? International, global, all of these things. So if you're trying to empower your own continent, and step away from all of these globalist regimes who are obviously following mystery tradition doctrine, because the United Nations point blank on their Lucis Trust website, which is their spiritual foundation for their philanthropy, they say they're following the esoteric version of Lucifer according to Madame Blavatsky. That is not hidden. That's just a fact that you can see on their website. And so when you apply the doctrines, well, it would seem that anything that is separating nations from each other would be profane. And to me, that's where, again, we talked about like NASA and, you know, their illumination event of the Apollo 11 moon landing. It illuminated the world without borders. That's what Carl Sagan said about it. So you can see that all of this globalist international oneness stuff is tied into this doctrine. So I just wonder if they have countries that try to break away from that. That is Satan to them, in my opinion. That is this dragon, and this slide will kind of reflect this. This is a United Nations mural that's in their round table room. You can see at the bottom all the different chairs where they all sit. This is their big mural. That's their great work basically depicted right here. And so this dragon that has the sword through it, that would be national identity. That would be separation of male and female sexes. Everything that's profane in the mystery doctrine that's not unified into one, or this divine equilibrium as they call it, that's that dragon that they want to slay. And so you can really see this play out with, you've done some shows on revisionist history of World War II, and I don't want to get into that can of worms right now, but There's a lot of very strange stuff in there. And, what's the great sin? Breaking away from international banking or like the IMF or any central banking that's not tied to all of these globalist conglomerates. That's when we have these evil dictators that we need to go in and save everybody from these evil dictators who are killing their own people or being crazy. And then we have to install a new banking system. That's, somehow evil dictators always have banking systems that need restructuring. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so you see the patterns over and over again where in the media we get, again, their version of this profane creator god, that they use that archetype in a dictator that is just bloodthirsty and drunk and wants to command and make everything terrible. And we need to be the heroes and go save everybody from that. So that pretty much aligns with everything you just said, where there are nations that want to be separate and they're going to get the wrath of the people who are running all of these institutions and following this doctrine, at least in the way that they're following the doctrine. I'm not, again, trying to demonize this doctrine or promote it, but the way it's being implemented, I think, is pretty fucked up, and you can see their footprints all over it,
Yep.
And I guess right now I can just quickly go into a dichotomy of the Orthodox Lucifer and the esoteric one. And I can let the audience make up their mind what makes more sense to them as to the general archetype of this consciousness. Now, again, I'm saying in the Orthodox viewpoint, I'm not going to take it to a literalist way here. I'm saying look at it from an occultist viewpoint, where this story is an allegory for a mode of consciousness of a group or a person or some spiritual essence, rather than some angel with wings who's flying around going, ha, 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 right? Take out that literalism, but view it like the occultist, but flip the script on the story. So this is what I think is very interesting. In Freemasonry, the North is a direction of darkness, death, and ignorance. That's the direction of the demiurge, essentially. And of all the lights in the Freemasonic Lodge, none are placed in the North. And this represents the winter solstice, where the sun is killed by this lower force, right? The Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. This is the lower Saturn, the demiurge, Father Time, everything that's in the Devil Tarot card. This represents the direction of the North in Freemasonry.
And this would be the astrotheology around December 21st?
Yes, where the sun is now reborn out of this darkness. So this is what's interesting, where this Freemasonic doctrine, where you poison everything, descend it into darkness, and then you birth it out as this phoenix, you're actually enacting the esoteric story of Lucifer, if you see what I'm saying. So you are reenacting that story as they view it. And so what's interesting in the Orthodox viewpoint, they say in Isaiah 14, this is essentially Lucifer's desire. So let's say there's a consciousness or an entity, a spiritual essence that was created. And this is the idea behind it, that this entity or essence wanted to exalt its throne above the stars of God and sit on the Mount of the Assembly, or the Assembly of God, in the recesses of the North. So God's throne is in the North in this story. And this is where he'll make himself like the Most High. So he wants to go above the cosmos and sit in God's throne and be the one in charge, right? And so this is the recesses of the North. And I find it interesting that if God's throne in this story is in the North, that's where Lucifer wants to ascend to. And then we have the United Nations. A lot of people talk about the 33 and the flat earth stuff, but I think what's very interesting is they're targeting the North. We're going to ascend to you can see the parallel there. Whether or not that's why that's there, I don't know, but you can see the parallel. And if the North is this direction of darkness and ignorance, the UN wants to illuminate all of the darkness and ignorance. So they want to go in and illuminate all of these ignorant countries that are trying to be nationalistic or whatever. You can see these themes just constantly connect to everything that's going on. So this mural, they say right on a United Nations website that swan in the middle is actually a phoenix rising. They say that's what it is. And so that represents the United Nations goals. So this phoenix rising is crushing this lower serpent. And above, we have this Vesica Pisces design, which represents birthing, the birthing waters of Pisces. And we have a male and a female in the middle unifying with the new birth, the new creation. And then we have a figure on the tree giving an apple to the girl in the background, like, the gnosis in the garden serpent. And all this is happening in the middle between these two pillars that are unified at the top. So that's like the hidden wisdom pillar right in the middle that they're just telling the story right there. And so what I think is interesting, again, flat earth is something I'm interested in all the stuff going on around it, but I don't make a definitive decision on it. I find the whole thing interesting. And as a researcher, Zen Garcia, he talks about in his idea, based on his understanding of religion or Orthodox religion, that he believes that Yahweh's throne is Polaris or something like that, the North Star. And I think that just some of his viewpoints, I think, are pretty interesting in relationship to this, because we have this targeting of the North. So to me, whatever you think about all this, there is definitely this weird theological or spiritual battle in terms of mythology and religion. And the mystery tradition paints its version of it, and the Orthodox paints its version of it. And I'm somewhere in the middle with it, where I find things in both. I perform my own alchemy on it, if you will. I take those things, I polarize them, I separate them, I look at both sides, and then I unify them together. And whatever I think is dead weight or lead, I'll get rid of. And what I think is something cool or I can find profundity in, I'll merge that into a new creation or a new understanding of philosophy or the religion. And that's how I approach these things. And that's being an alchemist in a way, So that's a way you can utilize that theme in a way I think is positive. So it's not like alchemy is evil, but you can see the way that they're utilizing it. It's very messed up in my opinion. And all of this stuff is driving it.
Now, Michael, have you ever given any thought as to why the flat earth theory was introduced when it was introduced? In other words, it just didn't grow organically. It was inserted into the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this. So what do you think is going on with that relative to what you're showing us here?
Well, you could look at it a couple different ways. Let's say for the sake of argument, it's actually flat and this is their deception. In that paradigm, they're trying to take something that was created a certain way and shape all of our consciousness to something that's the antithesis of that. So that's kind of like this idea of transmuting our consciousness to something molded to their will, right? Their higher will, like the guardian angel Crowley will. That's the will of deity, according to them. And so I'm not saying I'm saying that's Crowley philosophy. I'm not trying to put him in this, but so you could look at it that way where it's like they believe that, okay, if we're God or we're better than God or we should be God, we can do whatever the hell we want.
We can change it.
Exactly. So you could say, hey, we're introducing this and we're letting people know that there's this flat earth stupidity that they find to, I mean, again, we talked about this in the last discussion where the flat earth can be lumped into the devil card in tarot as a hieroglyph for everything ignorant and stupid and false and whatever.
For the profane.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So you could look at it that way. Or on the flip side, let's say that it is exactly how they say it is, the heliocentric spherical model. Then they could be releasing that to just make people look really stupid for whatever reason. And they're going to try to transmute that or benefit off of that infiltrating the truth movement. Now, it's really strange because I can kind of see it both ways on all these different angles and stuff. So again, I'm sort of in the middle of all this stuff, but I find what's going on around it very interesting because it really is this battle of these ideologies in some way. So it is funny how like what the flat earth does, regardless of its validity, a lot of people have said, well, you know what, this made me realize there is a creator God. And it gave people a more different perspective that they found to be positive. And it was the antithesis of all this stuff in the mystery religion. And so that is dangerous no matter what the truth of the world is to them, because that's of a profane consciousness. If that starts spreading, oh my God, that's why I think that there is a freak out about it, regardless of if they released it intentionally or not. So I guess to answer your question, there's so much involved in that question. And so people can make up their own mind about it, but there's a lot of different ways you could view it. And it's very relative to everything we've been discussing.
Yeah, I have to think about it, to be honest with you. So I don't have an answer. And I'm not even going to kind of offer up an explanation because it won't make any sense. But I'm going to give it a lot of thought because, it definitely has, it's playing a big part in the content that you're presenting here.
Yeah, and one last point on it. It is interesting how, at least in the Orthodox view, Lucifer is the great deceiver, right? Wants to make everybody bow down and worship him or its consciousness, its essence, and it's going to deceive everybody to do that. So you could look at it like, what better way to do that with a heliocentric model where you're the sun, you're, millions of years away from this stupid profane creation. The cosmos is light years away from all this crap, and that is what you're uniting with, the cosmos, right? And in the Old Testament, they say, don't worship the sun, moon, and stars. You utilize them for things, but you don't worship them as God, whereas that seems to be what a lot of this Freemasonic stuff is built upon. So you look at the dichotomies and you just got to figure out, based on, okay, if you're observing observations in Earth, trying to figure out, well, do we live on a sphere or a plane? There's that physical component. But then you have all this spiritual shit. And again, we have limited resources to a lot of the physical stuff, and we have to accept what NASA tells us or not. So man, it's a crazy time. So you could say, hey, maybe there is something divine about it being released, and maybe it actually is the real God's will, and or maybe it's a bit of both. It's very strange, and this is where I take a lot of middle ground on all these things, where they could go a lot of different ways.
It could be going back to the discussions I had with Priscilla Vogelbacher. It's Enlil versus Enki banging heads with each other. So where Enlil would be Yahweh and Enki would be Lucifer, going back to the Sumerian mythology. So, oh man,
Yeah.
I don't know.
And what's interesting too, you could look at if the controllers are in charge of orthodox or exoteric religion, have they molded their version of a creator god into the exoteric? So essentially what people are worshiping in Orthodox Christianity is actually the demiurge. It is an illusion, but it's a projection of a controlling spirit's idea of what the creator god is. Oh, this stupid creator god sucks. I'm going to make a religion that shows him where all the stupid people can go. And then I'm going to create this super secret religion that exalts me for all the smart people. And what's interesting is, what if people choose the projection because there might be some intrinsic truths in there, even if there are some falsities? And imagine how that would make something feel that they're actually choosing your boogeyman over you. And maybe there's a response of anger, because what is actually happening is there's a projection that people are worshiping of what you think is evil. And then people are actually choosing that, which is kind of hilarious. It's like this. I don't know. Again, this is very metaphysical and spiritual.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's almost like they would be saying, they're dumber than we thought.
But again, like maybe that's just an exposure of that they're not God and people are rebelling against them, and they just blame it. Everything they blame is on the profane, me and you, the low, us, and a personal creator God, whatever that really means to anybody. Those are the two enemies of all of this doctrine, especially according to Blavatsky. So I find that very telling. So what if we get a version of a personal creator God that's kind of nuts, or an extreme version of that, as a smokescreen to hide that actually being the truth, but the controllers are, and the personal, the real creator God allows it to happen for a higher purpose, saying like, okay, you can do whatever you want. Here's your chance to say, okay, consciousness that wants to be the highest God, prove yourself. I'm going to step back and let evil expose itself. And there's going to be some karmic purpose that, we're going through it, and we're going through trials. We're trying to make sense of all this shit going on. And maybe that is part of our purpose of what I would call karma, and teach and learning lessons in this lifetime. Maybe that's actually what it is. I don't know. So these are things I think about, and I tend to lean more towards this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. No, this is a lot of food for thought.
Yeah, and with the remaining time, I guess we can just run through these last slides and just explain a few more things and talk about the idea of Saturn and the black cube, and again, what the esoteric views as the evil creator god. On 9/11, there was what was a Saturn return happening, and in this slide, you essentially have April 4th, 1973. That's when the Twin Towers were officially opened, the opening ceremony. And this is when Saturn occupied 15 degrees Gemini. Now, when the Twin Towers disappeared, as they say, Saturn was in 14 degrees Gemini. So it was 1 degree away from its original position. And what it means is it was moving towards the original position, which makes it even more powerful. It's called an applying conjunction. It's moving towards that 15 degrees. So this makes Saturn super powerful astrologically. And if this is a national, America all-encompassing event, and America is basically kind of running the world, this would be a very macrocosmic Saturn return. So this is all about karma and reaping and sowing. So America, and thus America's influence on the world, is kind of reaping and sowing what has happened in the past 28 to 30 years. That's why when people are 28 to 30 years old, they're having their Saturn return. And that's why some people, it's really shitty because they might not have lived their life a very great way, and now they're reaping what they sow, and then they get confined because they kind of screwed up, or people will get returned to them if they've done good benefits, or a mixture of both. And so that's the whole idea of a Saturn return. And so that was happening on 9/11 for our country, essentially, if you symbolically add the Twin Towers opening ceremony as encapsulating that. So this makes all of these Saturnian themes of this black cube and the inverted cube once the Twin Towers went away, that makes all of that imagery much more powerful. And so this idea of Islamic terrorists and the black cube and Abrahamic religion that would be extremely powerful astrologically. So perhaps that's why they picked Islam. And you can see in this black cube picture at Mecca, they have 2 towers built in all around this. And then the black cube has a gold bit in it, a gold strip. And so black and gold represents, again, alchemy, lead, black, Saturnian colors, or gold, right? The spiritual transmutation. So whenever you see black and gold in something, that's when I really start, my eyebrows kind of raise. Oh, what's really going on here? And so to just explore that a little bit more, we have here, we can see the Mac cube. Now this is a cube illuminated, right? With technology, Promethean technology, with the apple bite taken out, right? The gnosis, the knowledge of good and evil to enlighten mankind. There is no good and evil. It's just oneness. And that's what you're trying to equilibrate. And so you do it through purging this dead Saturnian darkness. And the cube just basically represents Earth. That's why it's of the square, right? Plane geometry, 90-degree angles. So this is an enlightened Earth when you're looking to technology and the folks at Apple. And it's a demiurge, profane Earth when you're looking to Abrahamic religion like at Mecca. But there is a divine purpose for this lead, which has the gold around it. And so you can see this motif, like when you graduate from high school or college, they throw you in your Saturnian clothes and they give you their cube on your head. Essentially, the idea behind that is like, oh, well, you go to college and you want to get a better job and get money. That's Saturnian lead. That's atheist thinking, right? But of course, they help create that society and they help us push further into that darkness and we all get in debt. So it's kind of like this karmic debt to material possessions. So they want to use that energy. They want to utilize that Saturnian energy in all of these rituals. And so you can see it. I mean, 9/11 was just the perfect example of all of this stuff.
Unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. I had mentioned to you that previously, the other day, Michael, that talking about the black and gold, and I've done a lot of shows on the Beatles and what's gone on there with the McCartney conspiracy. But the Beatles originally recorded on Parlophone Records, which was a division of EMI. And the original Beatle label back in 1963 was called the Black and Gold. It was a black label with gold print, so black and gold.
Was that original label? Is that like when they were all cutesy and I want to hold your hand? Okay. That's interesting.
1963, that's the old black and gold label, and then it switched over to a black and yellow label. The reason why I bring it up is because all around the Beatles is all of this Masonic influence, and it's probably influence is not the best word. It's all Masonic, is what I should say. It's all wrapped up in all of this occult stuff.
You're right, because they had an alchemical transmutation, the whole Paul is dead thing, whatever the reality that is, that's a death and rebirth. And then they went from something, I don't know if it's profane, but like, want to hold your hand, American dream kind of stuff, into all this mystical Freemasonic kind of hidden stuff.
Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
Pepper.
Early on the cover. Very strange how that was, the black and gold started that out. So again, like you said, that there seemed to be some sort of alchemy going on there.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so I didn't want to.
Oh yeah, no problem. To wrap this up, if you can look at the Freedom Tower on the right, we have the old Twin Towers, and it's very dismal looking. We have the black inverted cubes, and we have the earth and the water motif. And those are the negative signs of the zodiac. So that's of the earth, right? That's the square. And you have to have the divine elements, the fire, and the air signs, the positive signs of the zodiac. So now we have a unified Freedom Tower that is all luminescent, right? It's, the air, element is there and, because the Mercury and communication and everything like that. But now it has the solar fire bouncing off of it luminously, right? So this one's a lot more advanced in architecture and things like that, rather than just two kind of, using square geometry to create the two twin pillars. Now this utilizes all this other stuff, and it is built on the base of a cube, but now this cube is kind of illuminated versus the inverted black cubes. And what's interesting is they have isosceles triangles built into the design. There's 4 up and 4 down, so a union of the above and below. And the isosceles triangle in astrology is related to what's called a yod aspect pattern. If you have three things that make an aspect of that, that's called the finger of God or the eye of God, the hand of fate. So there's something like sort of like the eye in the triangle energy to an astrological yod pattern. So it's
You're talking about the design of the building?
Yeah, the isosceles triangle, that's just what a yod pattern is in astrology. So it's interesting they're bringing an astrological alignment that means like, you know, the eye of God, and they're putting it into a one world trade center that has been transmuted and equilibrated, right? And so to wrap it up on this Saturnian lead, you have this Western greedy materialistic sort of archetype that the West represents. You know, whatever legitimacy of it, you know, obviously I'm not trying to say that the West has never been that or anything like that, but you know, it's like they wanted to create that. And then there's all this talk about like, you know, the United States creating terrorism, like United States created Al-Qaeda or ISIS, and that ends up in mainstream articles down the road. So this is sort of like the idea of ISIS, that the mother gets impregnated by the solar force or the male patriarchal force. So if this force is the lower demiurge force, then it's going to produce a profane creation that's just going to come back and devour itself, like Saturn eating its children. That's why the devouring of Saturn. And so what's interesting is all of these Islamic terrorists, whatever you think about that, they're all, we want to destroy the West. We want to devour the West. We want to, you know, the rape of Europa, right? The Jupiter Zeus bull rapes Europa. So if we have this phallic bull of Wall Street, all of that imperialism creates ISIS, and that comes back and devours the West. You see that in 9/11 and the official story, and then you see it with all the immigration and the so-called ISIS terrorism now. And then we have Donald Trump, who's like the big figurehead against ISIS. So this is like, he represents all of the Western materialist paradigm, right? And so he's at odds with evil ISIS, where it's, again, it's good and evil separated for the profane. And there's a black and gold motif to Donald Trump, where if we look at this real quick, you know, Trump Tower, he's got the black and gold. He's got the clock, right? Father Time, Saturn. And they depict him on the cover of The Economist as Yaldabaoth in Gnosticism, the lion serpent, because they give him a lion's face, right? You see the Trump memes of him with the lion's face. And then he's in the black suit, and then he's on the American flag coiled up like a serpent. And in my occult science series, I talk a lot about how the United States has a lot of allusions to the tribe of Dan and the sign of Scorpio, which again is that serpent constellation we talked about. So if we have him on this serpent constellation, Scorpio association to the American flag, coiled up like a serpent, and he's got his Saturnian colors, and then we have the lion's mane or head. Well, there's a little statue of Yaldabaoth in the Trump Tower I inserted there with the lion's serpent head. And again, that's sort of this idea of transmuting something profane into gold. And Trump has all this lion symbolism. You see a picture with him and his family. It's all black and gold. And red is the color of Mars. So that's like the male force. And his kid's on a lion. And the Trump Tower card and tarot. The tower represents a false doctrine building up a structure, and then it's just going to eventually crumble. And so this is what The Economist predicted as the Trump presidency. So this is like, say, hey, Trump is the demiurge. Trump represents all these profane things, Orthodox religion, a materialistic atheistic society. He sucks. And he's the one holding world in bondage. He's sitting on this nice, beautiful globe world with his tyrant throne. He's just like Yahweh of the Old Testament. That's what an occultist would look at from all this imagery. Now, when you look at the Trump campaign, the imagery is very different. He's like the Lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation. He's seen as like the Christ figure that is trumping the dualistic system, because you can see at the bottom left, we have the lion is saying Donald Trump, because this isn't working. We have the Democrats and Republicans, the dualistic system. That's not working. Trump's going to be the hero. So it's weird. In the Trump camp, they used a lot of like the opposite symbolism to promote him as like Christ in the lion form, the Lion of Judah. So it's a lot of religious shit going on here that I don't really know exactly how to explain. And this is interesting because there's something about the cosmic or mass consciousness that is very important in all of this. And so they're obviously trying to steer it. So I don't know. I mean, my gut feeling says, well, they control everything. So of course he's there for that reason. But you have to wonder, how much are they really in control? And if there is this upper force, is it actually utilizing profane things in a completely different way? And it's kind of like a reflection of our mass consciousness, where we have a lot of people that want to kind of go back to this American value system, but we still have a lot of fucked up shit. And so this is just some weird reflection of us as a people. It's really weird. And that's kind of a lot to do with this philosophy, where the mass consciousness is extremely important. It's like this macrocosm. But I just wonder if there's some other metaphysical force at play with this, and that might not end up being the complete result of this, depending on how we all act. I don't know. It's very strange.
Or there's two different esoteric camps.
Yeah, that too. It's very interesting.
So, I mean, we have to think in terms of that it may not be unified, that there could be different schools of the mystery schools, or two different sects or cults or whatever you want to call it.
Game of Thrones thing, right?
Game of Thrones, yeah, that are duking it out, you know. So anyway, very interesting.
Yeah, and we only got a few more, and we can wrap up the Blavatsky root race cycle.
Okay.
So if we move on all of that Saturnian-led stuff that we looked at, and we bring it back to this idea of the Freedom Tower. Okay, this was the result of 9/11. And what is some symbolism that we can derive from this, where, well, obviously it's the one World Trade Center, and that's what all of this esoteric doctrine is. We're all one. Everything is one. It's all equilibrated into this one spiritual essence. And then it's called the Freedom Tower, right? So what are we free from? And of course, freedom, that's a big picture concept. How does that implement in the details, in the micro? That's what really is important to me. But I think people just, people hear the word freedom. Oh, that's great. But somebody's version of freedom might be very different from somebody else's. And this is a lot of the battling going on between what people would call more, liberal and conservative stuff right now, or like the Trump camp. So what's interesting to the occultist, freedom is freedom from the demiurge. We know that by now. And there's a quote from Elaine Pagel's Gnostic Gospels. I did a little video on her early in the series, and I'm not trying to paint her in a specific picture. I'm just trying to say this is part of the doctrine, and however it's implemented, we're looking at it. So this is taken from pages 36 to 38, and she talks about the idea of the illumination of the initiate being free from the demiurge. And she says that before gaining gnosis, or knowledge, the candidate worshiped the demiurge, mistaking him for the true God. Now, through the sacrament of redemption, the candidate indicates that he has been released from the demiurge's power. So this is the power of the demiurge, that is ignorance, Saturnian-led, all of that stuff. In this ritual, he addresses the demiurge, declaring his independence and serving notice that he no longer belongs to the demiurge's sphere of authority and judgment. So this is pretty interesting, back to the Declaration of Independence, which is freeing us from monarchy, right? And monarchy and government is a demiurge institution, as strange as that might sound, because if these occultists are running these institutions, then they are part of them. But again, they have this higher mind, well, quote unquote higher mind in their minds, that they're above that, but the demiurge stuff is for the profane. So to me, this is how they might view government and Orthodox religion, that they're in charge of it, or they don't mind if it operates, because it serves a purpose by weeding out the ignorant from those who might want to go and be illuminated by the mysteries. So to me, the 1776 Masonic influence is declaring independence from their idea of, the Gnostic demiurge. And so this says, okay, if you're illuminated to the mysteries, you're no longer subject to that. So this might be why all of these celebrities or politicians or people who are in the spotlight that are in the know, they're never really subject to punishment. And to wrap it up, we can talk about this root race cycle that Madame Blavatsky has in her book. And if anybody wants to find this, just Google Madame Blavatsky or Theosophy root race cycle and search images, and this will come up. And it's just in the book. I can't remember which one it is, Secret Doctrine of Isis Unveiled, but this is very important. And once I started reading through this really made me understand a lot. And so there's a lot going on here, but I'll break it down. using concepts that we've already been over. So in the middle here, we have this red dot, and that says first root race or R race. So that is this first creation, and this will be analogous to the Big Bang. This is the cosmic egg and primordial matter in the mystery religions and George Lemaitre's Big Bang theory. That's the premise of it. And it's this idea that there's a single point from which the deity wanted to manifest itself, and into that infinite, the infinite deity came into being in physical manifestation. So this is like the top of the tree of life, the top sphere called Keter, the first sphere or Sephirah. And that is where the visible or physical or, the world that we're experiencing now on a higher and lower plane is all manifested. And so it's interesting how, of course, the Big Bang, in some theories of it, not all, it was condensed into a single point, and then from that burst everything, and that caused the cycle of evolution, and it infinitely expanded, right? Some people say it's not infinitely expanding and whatever, but the point being, there's enough of the mystery religion doctrine that parallels that, not to mention the whole Lemaitre cosmic egg stuff. So this dot represents the start of the root race cycle. Now, what Blavatsky states, and this is very important, is that Darwinian evolution, when viewed from a materialist paradigm, gets it all wrong. Where Darwinian evolution is true, but they're missing the spiritual component. So the spiritual component is that from this dot, all of creation descends down this spiral arc. And so you can see it goes down where it says spiritual descent or the fall. This is the esoteric meaning of the fall of mankind or Lucifer or whatever. It's the fall into the material world for a purpose of evolution and karmic equilibrium. And so it goes to the second root race. And so what happens is when it starts out, creation is androgynous. Like I said, it's the primordial creation. So this is what Blavatsky says in Genesis. If you read the books of the Kabbalah and apply them to Genesis, Darwinian evolution is taught in Genesis, which is kind of hilarious to me because so many people are like, Genesis creation is stupid. And again, like that's just like what people who are more of the atheistic mindset, they freak out about it. But Blavatsky says that the theory of evolution is taught in Genesis, and all of these mystery traditions go back thousands of years. So if they're just revealing the mystery tradition in modern cosmology and science, people are just defending a religious interpretation of Genesis. You see the irony there?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what it says is that the first creation, that's not the demiurge, the bad creator or whatever. That it says it created them male and female. So what she says in Kabbalah, that means male and female means one being both sexes. So you're androgynous, the androgynous creation at the start, the primordial man or whatever you want to call it. So this would be representative of Virgo, the constellation we talked about. The material creation united with the pure androgynous spirit. And so what happens is, part of this cycle, it goes down and then it goes lower and lower. So then it's kind of goes into a bisexual mode. And this, I think, is reflected by the rib of Adam and the dust and whatever. And then it goes down into Cain and Abel. And she says allegorically, Cain and Abel is the separation of the sexes. So even though Abel is a brother, he's like the feminine principle, according to her. So this is when the unity got split into duality. And that story is just an allegory for this happening. So this is split into sexual generation. So this is like going into Scorpio, male and female separated. And that's why Scorpio is the sign associated with sex or sexual generation. So this is the fall going through the second root race, which is more bisexual. And the third root race is the split of the sexes. And then it goes down to the lowest point of gross materialism that she kind of calls it. And so this is what she says is the Kali Yuga. This is like the lowest level of degradation. And that begins the cycle back upwards. Now, there's all these other mini cycles or rounds, I think, within this. So there's even cycles within cycles. And this has to do with the zodiac. And she talks about how all of the adepts know the astrological correlations to this root race cycle. And this is the most important thing. She says that the adepts know this cycle. And this is what they keep hidden from mankind. Because we're the profane, we're not allowed to know this stuff. So they guide us through these cycles because they believe that this is the truth. This is what mankind's destiny is, to descend into darkness and then now go up a spiritual phoenix rising ascent up on the white side with the white arrow going up. And I have a little yellow line, and that's where Blavatsky says we are when she wrote these books. So if you accept the timeline, she wrote them sometime in the 1800s. So from 200 years from then, we're approaching this sixth root race. So you can see the Roman numeral 6RR. So you can see how that's in line. The white dot is in line with the red dot on the parallel line. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So this means that we're headed towards a more androgynous spiritual essence because we're becoming equilibrated back with the first root race. But now we're able to ascend above that original point of creation up to the yellow. So that's why it seems like now is like this time when everything's kicking into gear, where they believe that we're approaching this sixth root race, and this is a huge time, and that they need to guide humanity into this, and that anybody who's resisting this is just caught in their lower nature. So they're still caught in lower religion, Orthodox religion. They're still caught in male and female problems. They're still caught in the race polarity. And so this is why we have all of these themes of unifying the sexes and the races. And I'll go back to this diagram, but I'll go to this slide real quick, where we have all of these activist motifs. Now, what's very interesting about this is all just reflecting the esoteric allegory of spiritual ascension and this essence of Lucifer in the esoteric sense. So this androgynous equilibrium of God, heaven and earth. And you can see like the feminists who take their shirts off and run around, they're protesting patriarchy. I'm still not asking for it. They don't want this patriarchal rape. And they tell us that, all these 1 in 5 women get raped on college campuses, which is apparently a distorted thing. But, again, there's this whole feminist movement that's male patriarchy is evil. And again, I'm not defending patriarchy, but I'm saying that we're given an archetype of it. And you can see the liberty bare-breasted goddess below, which is the French Revolution. And the French Revolution, as far as I understand it, was built upon, the Hermetic traditions and the Renaissance and all that stuff kind of like rising again. And so isn't it strange how we have these half-naked women waving this flag for equilibrium? But what they don't understand, and this is what I try to point out in the series, I'm not against women's rights and equality. I'm saying that all of these groups and activism, I think, is just reflecting an esoteric allegory, and you're actually just being a symbol for a religion. And if that is the case, wouldn't you want to know about that? Because you're actually just being used for a religious reason. And so I go through some videos later on in the series about the pride of Lucifer, and that's kind of this important thing. That pride is this rebellion against Orthodox doctrine. And so you have this pride, equilibrium, LGBT going to transgender now and stuff like that. This is all in line with this doctrine of merging the sexes, merging the races, merging all the nations. And you can see like the transgender, like the Obama thing in the bottom right, we have like the male and female. That's the middle pillar, right? That's the equilibrium pillar of male and female into one. And you see it reflected there. And then we have the race one where we have the white and the black and then the middle. And then we have man and machine merging, right? That's the whole transhumanist thing, singularity. And then we have the religions merging, like you see the believe bumper stickers. There's a coexist one where they have all the religions, and that's what the occultists believe. They all stem from the same source. And in the esoteric sense, that's the mystery religion doctrine. So you can see it reflected in all of this activism. The last part of my series goes through all this stuff. And what's very interesting is with this transhumanist agenda, whatever you think about the legitimacy of singularity, if that's just a pipe dream, if it's like, the mission to Mars, the thing they just constantly talk about. And I really hope so. I really hope it's just this pipe dream that will never happen. Basically, what seems to be on the agenda here is this ties in a lot of stuff that the truther movement has been talking about for a long time. They're poisoning us. They're trying to make us unhealthy. They don't mind people getting cancer left and right. There might be treatments that will be helpful for that stuff that they suppress. They really want the body to break down and the spirit. And I think this is my personal opinion, where it seems to be leading for me, is that their solution, they're trying to corner us and to be like, hey, the world is so messed up. There's just diseases, cancer, race wars. The sexes can't get along. We have crazy dictators. They want to use the nuclear bomb on each other, whether that's legitimate or not. All this fear. What's the solution? You know what? Technology. We can merge with machine and become transhumans, and we can transcend race, gender, nationality. You can be whatever you want to be. You don't have to be confined to your profane body that made you a man or made you a woman or made you, a Caucasian or made you an African American. That's the lower nature. Here's our solution. Here's our immortal body that we've given you. And I wonder if there is, let's say there is an actual legitimacy to it, that they have some sort of body that they want to transpose their consciousness into, at least they believe it's immortal. Could that be part of the alien agenda, where they would come out as being these saviors with these transhuman bodies, and they're going to make a new heaven, a new earth, everything in Revelation that you could view from whatever way you want to look at it, and they'll be the elect. And it is very interesting how a lot of these things kind of seem to be pushing towards that. And so this is the esoteric version of uniting heaven and earth, and all of this nanotechnology stuff with like CERN and the statue of Shiva. They want to understand creation because they want to mold it to me in their own image. And this is what's interesting in relation to at least the Orthodox interpretation of the Watcher angels or the sons of God in Genesis, the ones that mated with human women. I'm sure you've heard all about that. On the Lucis Trust website, the sons of God, those are the good guys. Those are the ones with this divine intellect that are bestowing the knowledge of, good and evil in its true form to mankind. And they have Shiva breaking down material form and structure and rebirthing it. And then in the story, the Watcher angels are basically genetically modifying everything. They're messing with animals, they're messing with humans, they're doing all this stuff, and they're seen as very, very bad. They're very naughty in the Orthodox viewpoint, whereas they're heroes in the esoteric viewpoint. Now, one thing I think is very interesting is, if you look into some of these future societies, there's this place called the India Future Society, and they have it on their website talking about how Eastern religion and Hermetic religions aren't against modifying the body or using technology, whereas the Abrahamic or Orthodox religions are against it. So they're trying to make them look stupid, unenlightened, ignorant. They're holding humanity back. We could become transhumans. And they also talk about how if we're able to utilize things like CRISPR and modify animals and humans, they say that there's a morality line that can be drawn where if we can make them better, then it might be immoral not to enhance people. And that's what really creeps me out, because it's like, you know what? The moral obligation is to mess with your genes and make you better, whether you like it or not. And I wonder if this mass consciousness thing, if you get enough people where something will be engaged, where they'll be like, you know what? That's where we're going. And I certainly don't want to have a part of that. And I'll tell you one thing. If that transhuman thing ever actually becomes a reality in my lifetime, there's no way I'm going to do that. And that's pretty much what I'll sum it up at. And that seems to be where this is going. And in all of these transhumanist societies, they really talk about spiritual evolution being this final frontier. And they say, we don't want to go back to this dark ages. And they always utilize this 1,000 years of darkness, which, again, you've covered the flamenco stuff, I think, with Kara St. Louis. That might not even have been real. But they use that to say, we can't go back to that way. We need to evolve. And this root race diagram, to me, just kind of says it all.
And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth, and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.